Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're digging into a seriously fascinating and highly debated piece of source material, V.D. Savarkar's 1908 book, The Indian War of Independence 1857. We're going to explore the events of 1857, but not through your typical textbook or colonial lens. Instead, we'll be looking through the specific framework laid out by this Indian revolutionary, which honestly completely flipped the script on how this pivotal moment in history was understood.
So let's kick things off with the big, core question raised by Savarkar's thesis. And by the way, this manuscript was so controversial it was actually banned before it could even be published. For decades, the British Empire classified the massive bloodshed of 1857 as a mere Sepoy mutiny. But Savarkar reviewed those exact same events and argued something entirely different. He made the case that this wasn't a mutiny at all, but rather a premeditated national war.
Section 1. Mutiny or Independence War. Let's take a look at why the name we give to history actually matters so much.
According to the source, labeling this a simple mutiny was a very deliberate tactic used by the British. Why? To obscure the noble concepts of revolution and independence. You see, the word mutiny implies a localized, totally spontaneous revolt over petty, everyday grievances. But a war of independence, that is defined by an all-moving principle, a grand, unifying motive that inspires massive numbers of people to literally shed their own blood.
Savarkar actually wrote this history specifically to familiarize his people with these larger concepts. As he famously put it, the nation ought to be the master and not the slave of its own history. He risked his own freedom to provide this blueprint for future liberation. By redefining the conflict, he wasn't just writing history, he was actively trying to awaken a dormant political consciousness and turn the past into a powerful tool for freedom.
Moving right along to Section 2, Swadharma and Swaraj. Let's unpack the two deeply philosophical root causes behind this blueprint.
What's really fascinating here is that these two principles were the absolute twin engines of the uprising. In the minds of the revolutionaries, they were completely inseparable. You have Swadharma, which represented the people's religious duty and cultural freedom. And then you have Swaraj, representing absolute self-rule and political independence. The source argues that in the Eastern mind, these two concepts are so deeply connected that you simply cannot have one without the other.
Think about it. You couldn't protect your Swadharma, your religion, if you didn't have Swaraj. Because at the time, the British administration was actively tearing down native customs. The text points out that missionaries were state-supported, native laws were being forcibly changed, and princely grants were getting confiscated. The revolutionaries realized that political slavery was the root of all this suffering, and that the first step towards Dharma was to be a free man of a free country.
Which brings us to Section 3, the greased cartridge myth. This is arguably the most famous, and maybe the most misunderstood, element of 1857.
We've all heard the story, right? A rumor spreads about rifle cartridges being greased with cow and pig fat, and boom, that starts the whole thing. The colonial narrative leans super heavily on this incident. It portrays the entire uprising as just a procession of blind, unthinking soldiers reacting to one singular religious grievance. But was it really just the cartridges?
The source material argues a firm no. It claims those cartridges were merely a chance spark, an accidental trigger. Because if it was only about the cartridges, the rebellion would have stopped the exact moment the British withdrew them. Instead, ordinary peaceful citizens, powerful monarchs, and displaced landowners all took up arms. And as Savarkar brilliantly points out, none of these folks were out there biting any cartridges.
Section 4. The Secret Revolutionary Network. If this was truly a national war, it required some massive premeditation.
Imagine being a villager back in 1857 and witnessing this vast, underground, heist-like operation happening right under the noses of the colonizers. The text reveals that this uprising was meticulously, carefully planned. Leaders like Nana Sahib and his brilliant advisor Azimullah Khan were traveling all over on diplomatic missions to unite different factions. Secret revolutionary committees were set up within military regiments, and they were all plotting a synchronized, simultaneous uprising originally scheduled for May 31st.
And the methods they used to communicate? Absolutely brilliant. They used everyday items as secret, silent messengers. The chapati, a simple, everyday flatbread, was passed from village to village. Meanwhile, the red lotus flower was circulated among the soldiers. To the British, this looked completely harmless, but to the Indians, these were clear signals of the impending revolution, masking a massive communication network right out in the open.
This incredible organizing leads us right into Section 5, a united national front.
Thanks to all that secret networking, centuries-old religious divisions practically vanished. The source text highlights how Hindus and Muslims fought shoulder to shoulder as brothers by blood under a common national flag. The common goal of defeating the British, who were seen as a mutual threat to both faiths, created this incredibly powerful unified front. The text even notes how the Emperor of Delhi issued proclamations appealing equally to Hindus and Muslims to rise up for Swaraj.
And it definitely wasn't just men doing the fighting. Women were fierce, active participants. Take the Ranee of Jhansi, for example. When the British tried to annex her kingdom by refusing to recognize her adopted son, she didn't just write a polite petition. She literally drew her sword and commanded troops with unparalleled bravery. Her participation really underscores just how widespread and societal this entire conflict was.
Section 6. The United States of India. So what was the ultimate goal of all this bloodshed and secret planning?
Well, the revolutionaries definitely did not want to return to anarchy. They had a vision. They envisioned establishing a United States of India that would take its rightful, independent place among the free nations of the earth. Savarkar's text argues that the movement went way beyond just wanting to destroy British rule. It was a deeply constructive, nationalistic effort to establish a unified government operated by Indians for Indians.
If we trace the timeline back through Savarkar's eyes, 1857 starts to look like the inevitable explosion of 100 years of stolen sovereignty. Exactly a century prior, in 1757, the Battle of Plassey sowed the initial seeds. The tension boiled for decades, massively accelerated by Lord Dalhousie's ruthless policies of annexing independent states, rendering countless monarchs and citizens destitute, until finally the volcano erupted.
Now, here is a wild twist of history for you. The very book containing all this source material had to be smuggled like contraband. It proves just how incredibly dangerous the British found this revolutionary blueprint. Savarkar's manuscript was banned by the British government before it was even printed. It had to be covertly published in Holland and then smuggled into India inside boxes with false bottoms, completely disguised under covers of classic English novels like the Pickwick Papers. It ultimately became an underground Bible for future generations of revolutionaries.
So, let's wrap up with a question to really think about. How does the simple act of naming an event, calling it a mutiny versus a war, completely change how we remember history? Think about how the words we use shape our reality, and ask yourself what other historical truths might be hiding right behind the labels we've always been taught to just accept. Savarkar's text forces us to look past the colonial narrative and consider the reality of a massive, organized, and deeply philosophical war of independence. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.